Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's forum from MDG Boston. Tonight we are having a really wonderful forum. You know, as we look toward how COVID has affected our society, there's been a really strong push toward moving into home healthcare. The three talks tonight are geared around how some of the details are put together to actually make effective home health care efforts work. But before we get into our talk tonight, I'd like to share a little bit about MDG Boston, how we're changing, and how things are migrating for our organization into a larger community for the medtech area. So those of you that have been with us in the past know that we work our live events, often many years ago out of Constant Contact, more recently out of Regis College. We would have anywhere from 100 to 160 live people come face to face, share networking at our tables and meet our speakers. And after a lot of consideration, we figured out a couple of platforms to replicate that environment virtually. Some of you have already spent some time on the Remo platform, which occurred this evening from 5 to 6. You got to meet people, share LinkedIn contacts, tell stories about whatever's been going on, and literally engage similarly to a face-to-face, though you may not be able to actually shake hands. But it's a wonderful way to get to know people in smaller settings within a larger gathering. So we hope over the next months and weeks that you'll come back to our platform and engage with our community in that kind of an environment. Tonight, the forum is actually going to be in Zoom, so that's where we are right now. More of the typical venue that everybody is really pretty used to. As we look forward to MDG over this coming 10-month season, where we have in the past put on one forum per month on the first Wednesdays of every month, this year we'll be having 3 Wednesdays a month programming. Very excited about this as we build out our community. The first Wednesdays will mimic our regular type of clinical level programming. Tonight is, of course, that example of how actually clinicians will end up dealing with home and telehealth and home health care practices. The second Wednesday is really a very, very new addition for our organization. We're starting what is called MDGX Talks. You've heard of TED Talks. Well, what we've learned as we've talked and had discussions with so many people in the industry is a lot of people have a lot of great stories to tell. Then on the third Wednesday of the month, we'll be having an additional forum, this time on how COVID has affected product development and the strategies that product development firms and startups have used to get around the limitations caused by not being able to gather in numbers and other types of obstacles for the product development process. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And what I want to do is to walk through here we go. We're on the MDG Boston site. This is our home site. In September, we have the current COVID type of medtech forums that we just spoke about. October will be startup pitches and diversity leadership. We're very, very excited about that. I'll have a little bit about that in a second, but for the first time ever, MDG Boston will be offering a prize to the winner of a startup pitch. November will be surgical robotics and 3D printing, and December will be advanced innovations in orthopedics. And again, each of those months, the second Wednesday of the month will comprise of MDGX Talks, stories from people, stories from sponsors, stories from our community for everybody to listen and hear. So why don't I do this? I want to go, and this is how you would do this. You'd go to the upcoming events, and then here are the 3 events that we have listed. Here's tonight, and then here's the MDGX Talk, Stories of Life. And then if we scroll down, these are the 5 stories that we have scheduled. A lot of fun. Georgia from University of British Columbia will have her team and talk about their developing BiPAP machines for ventilators during this pandemic. Ryan Mannion will talk about his story about starting Book Thinkers Family, a community for book readers on Instagram. Hey, look, we're stuck at home, people are reading, and then they want to have outlets to kind of reach out to people. And Book Thinkers Family is one of those types of relaxing communities, similar to others. Peter Randall will tell a story about a Chinese supplier sending unsolicited masks for distribution. I'll tell a story. And then Maria Shepard and Ilse Wiebeck will share some of their experiences that have been impacted by what we've all been going through. So hope you will all join us. It's not a big sponsor thing, it's a community thing. It'll be a lot of fun. Let me go back now to the events page, and this is again how you would find these, going to upcoming events. And we go down to product development for startups during COVID. Again, Wednesday, we don't have it announced up here, but there will be the Remo networking from 5 to 6 beforehand. Here's some things that are exciting. Look, even I'm involved in a startup. We need to do some preclinical testing in a lab, and my CEO calls and he goes, look, the hospital just said we can only have 4 people in the lab, and we needed 10. So, oh my goodness, what do you do when you have to get through that kind of an obstacle? Well, we have a story on how that was done, which will be really terrific. We have a story on how to, what's going on with vaccine development. And when we do get a vaccine, will we trust it when it comes? So we'll learn a little bit about the obstacles and the environment of vaccine development in our country, and how scale-up procedures have been melded with clinical practice to bring us vaccines at just total crazy speed, unprecedented pressure to deliver a biologic in such a short period of time. And then additionally, we'll get some really great information on how many elective surgeries were canceled due to COVID, and some discussion on how will we catch up with hundreds of thousands of elective surgeries that were postponed during the first months of this time. And then startups often get to the end, and especially during this time, their money's running out, timelines are dragged out, things are more expensive, but yet we all know if you want to get into a 510K, you got to have that packaging done. So a little bit of talk on how to get through that last step when your funds are starting to run low. So very excited about the third Wednesday of the month. One other point here is, as we go into our October month, which is Startups Month, we are having a sponsored pitch practice, a sponsored pitch practice engagement here, where we'll have a number of startups, many of them from diverse founders, who will come tell us their story. There will be a panel that will listen to the stories, and then ultimately we'll go back behind the scenes and pick a winner to go home with $1,000. Very exciting changes coming to MDG to create this kind of programming that's not only interesting, but fosters connections between all of us within the industry. Let's see now. Then we are going to go to tonight. That's right. There's a lot of things to talk about here. So tonight, you've all seen this. Tonight's event is sponsored by Sunrise Labs, a co-organizer. We're so very excited to have Alex here talk about their engagement in developing home healthcare products, and what does it mean to start with the actual user in that specific kind of environment. Carlos will then talk about his device, an amazing device in home, not just taking your temperature, not just taking your blood pressure, but measuring the white blood cell count while you're in cancer therapy, and then remotely your clinician is able to monitor a very important component of your health during periods in between chemo and other cancer treatment therapies. And then lastly, all that data, where does it go? How do we collect it? How do we know it's the data? How do we know it's safe? And Shanti Ramakrishnan, CEO of eDevice, a participant in not just back-end cloud and what we do with the data, but also with some devices clear-cut, put together to make sure that that data streams really excellently. So at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. I ask that you use the Q&A to submit them, and we'll get to them at the end of the talks tonight. And I think we got it pretty much covered as of right now. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. And at this point, I'd like to turn this over to Alex, Director of User-Centered Design at Sunrise. Alex, you've been doing this an awfully long time, my friend. Please help us understand how you're going to be doing this as we look into the home healthcare portion of the medtech market.
Sure thing. Thanks for the great introduction, Jeff. If you don't mind, stop sharing your screen. There we go. So let's get this up and running. So I'm here today to share some insights that can help us be more successful responding to the demand for home use devices. And home use is a broad topic, so we're going to focus on 3 aspects of designing a device for at-home use to kind of keep things manageable. We're going to talk about how we get started the right way. We're going to talk about how to succeed with our users and how to build our device well so we'll meet user expectations. So let's jump in. So there's an obvious need for healthcare delivery at home. You know, COVID-19 has exposed a lot of opportunities. It's also pushed a lot of activities that were typically out of the home into the home. Funding exists and it's being used to drive innovation. This is a reality of our current situation. A lot of us are looking at this situation and saying, hey, let's pivot and let's ship fast. And this is really a great point to kind of pause and take a moment and really reflect on what we're about to engage in if we're going into the home. It's very easy to chase the right problem with the wrong solution, and it's important to get our inputs right. As medical device developers, we all know the process for developing things the right way, you know, following regulations, but it's also really crucial that we're designing the right thing when going into the home environment. Reworking a product that doesn't connect with users is much more expensive to fix the later you get into development. So what does that mean? In practice, we really need to embrace the things that we don't know that we don't know. A lot of us really know a lot about the health conditions that we're addressing, a lot of the technology. We may even know a little bit about the users, the use environment, but there's a lot to learn about going into the home environment. We can greatly increase our chances of success by investing in understanding, changing this use environment and these users. Inherently, we all get that the home environment is going to be different than the clinical environment, but it's going to be surprising at how much less controlled and how less constrained it is once you get past the basics. You know, lighting, ambient noise, those are all pretty easy to understand. But you know, key point, it's going to be a lot harder to intervene if something goes wrong. If we think about the clinical spaces that we operate in, drug delivery is a good example. Protocols exist to minimize administration errors. You know, in the diagnostic space, if we're leaving and going into the home, clinical spaces have sample collection protocols and chain of custody tracing to minimize false positive or false negative errors. Our device's design really has to find ways to compensate for this. There's even weirder issues that you don't find until you go into the home space and spend time there. And they're difficult to anticipate. You know, I remember a decade ago doing my first risk analysis for a home peritoneal dialysis device. And we had to think about things like cat damage and infection risk due to a pet taking a nap on a dialysis bag on a warmer and, you know, puncturing the container and, you know, getting infectious materials into the stream. It's not a hypothetical issue. This was discovered during post-market surveillance, and it's things that is tough to anticipate. You know, if we talk about our users, they're also very different. Previous clinical users were a lot more uniform and a lot more predictable because they had medical training and they had protocols to follow. Our previous users didn't include people with a 6th grade reading level. They also, you know, clinicians aren't impacted by health conditions that alter their physical and cognitive capabilities. Our new users are going to vary widely in their technological capabilities. It makes it a lot more likely that they're going to find very different interpretations for what our user interface is telling them. and will trust that our device is a lot more infallible. We've all heard about drivers following their GPS into a dangerous situation. You know, there's news stories about people driving into lakes. I can tell you from direct experience that, you know, if we're working on an app and it has a pop-up warning message, for example, realize that some of our novice users are going to be interpreting that as a message directly from their clinician. And they may even act without critically analyzing what the impact of their decision will be. Our new users are also going to have competing priorities for their attention and time. I mean, COVID is a great example of this. People's children are coming into the home. They're becoming, you know, at-home teachers while balancing their work life. Some of them may have lost their jobs. Those demands on their attention, how they're going to pay their bills, are impacting our ability to be successful in their homes. And we have to identify, understanding it is critical to identifying the right approach to solving their problems and factoring in the fact that they have those jobs, families, and lives. How are we going to help them to balance all those time demands and build a partnership with them? So let's assume we took some great advice, we captured our design inputs, we really spent some time getting to know our new users and their home environment and what it looks like. How do we take what we learned and drive success? Meeting them where they are is really a mindset. That means understanding that we are building a relationship with people who we need to adopt our device or service in their lives. Our device's design will either mesh or not mesh into their life, or it will be rejected. Health outcomes are what payers are reimbursing against, and getting users to adopt our device is really going to influence that health outcome. The decision to adopt or reject the device is going to happen a lot faster than you expect it will. So if we're meeting them where they are, what does that mean for patients? First, it's important to know that they're not going to look at the product rationally and just fall into line because they're sick. They have a life that they built before we came into their world. Our device is the new thing that's impacting their life. Does our device integrate easily? Are we only asking one new behavior? Or is there 15 activities that we have to have them go through to manage it in competition with their life? If our device requires a ton of care and feeding, it's the last thing somebody who's sick or managing a sick loved one really needs. It's another high maintenance relationship where they're serving our device. Just being sick isn't really that much of a motivator anymore these days for patients to completely change their lifestyle to adopt your new medical device. So what should we be doing? Automating that like crazy to really reduce our demands on them. So focus on collecting the data that we need from connected sensors or from existing passive data sources, so that when we are asking for them for something, it's really important and critical and it can't be achieved any other way. And use that information that we're gathering to accelerate workflows and reduce the impact on their lives. When we ask something from them, do it when they can act on it. And that way we can show up with the right answer at the right time. So when we talk about meeting clinicians where they are, what does that look like? You know, one of the first things that comes up in a discussion with a connected home device is data. You know, a big part of why we connect is for data purposes. If we're sending raw data to clinicians, it's a low risk to companies. It lowers the regulatory barriers that, you know, get us into market, but it's also placing the interpretation of that data onto the HCPs and relying on their medical training. Keep in mind that when we do this, we're really shifting the burden of our device onto the clinicians, and they're squeezed for time as it is. Much of the connected health studies that I've been part of, one of the first constant points of feedback that we hear from clinicians is that they're rejecting adding new data sources into their workflow. It's kind of a broad statement. If you want the more accurate interpretation, scratching the surface on that is actually, it gets you to that they want synthesized data. They want to see suggestions on therapy. They want to see suggested approaches with supporting evidence so they can decide if they agree or not. What this is doing is lowering the cognitive burden on your user and increasing their ability to be effective. You're giving them superpowers. Additionally, how are we fitting into their workflow? Are we asking them to carry another device, another laptop, another phone, another tablet? They're not pack mules. They'll reject that. They don't need another physical piece of hardware a lot of times. And adoption is tough if clinicians have to find new ways to charge for the time. If we can't fit into the payer, the payer classifications easily, it really disrupts the way that we can get to the end patient to make that healthcare, most effective. It's also about relationships. Is our device supporting their relationship? Or the way that we're interacting with both of them driving better connection and communication between them? Or are we demanding so much of their time that we're really cutting into that 15 or 20-minute consultation time that we know is kind of an average for the marketplace, and taking away from that time where they're making good decisions together and being effective as a partnership? So how are we going to bring all of our inputs and our user-centered mindset into the device itself? These following slides are some of the best practices that we find will make us more successful in the right healthcare, in delivering the right healthcare at home experience. The first one is focus. Building a tool that does fewer things really well is going to make us more successful than doing more things. Imagine we're making an app. The more features you have to support, the more watered down our focus is going to be on each one. The timeline's not going to change. It's just the amount of investment we can do into each area. Our features, if we imagine our app, are likely to include delivering a therapy, maybe collecting data to show compliance, reminding our patients, things like that. If there are additional features that we can invest in, we can imagine a bunch of them. Investing in fewer allows us to dive deeper into each of these core areas and go beyond the basics. If we build a basic pop-up reminder for the user, are they in a location where they have everything they need in order to take action? Staying focused might mean that we're actually able to dig deeper and build cellular geofencing into the trigger for the reminder so that they only get it when they're near their therapy supplies. What about if we're giving them, instructions for use materials? So are we just doing a digital version of the paper IFU to help them learn better? If we stay focused, it might mean that we actually have the time to dig deeper and create a better in-device training experience that uses experiential learning to help coach users, things like augmented reality training aids, where we can actually coach them through the use of their device with a virtual experience. And shifting over to talking about feedback loops, if they invest their time in our product, will our users really be able to feel a difference in their life and their health? We're going to assume so. Relating that feeling in a tightly woven loop to the core experience that we're providing them will build patterns of behavior that become habits. And those habits are one of the strongest tools that we have in our arsenal to improve health outcomes. And that in turn is a measurable amount of change that a payer is really going to respond to and make us successful in the marketplace. Once users are in this loop, a good set of goals to keep in mind is, how is our device able to evolve to support them? Once we set them up for mastery, can we get out of the way and shift into a maintenance mode to keep them focused on being successful and allow them to operate and lead the way for us? We're going into the home. The comparisons to consumer products are inevitable. Unlike common commercial apps and devices, the wrong approach for us is really to expect to be an immersive experience or a sticky experience with our device. The reason why this is a bad approach is because it's unintentionally centering our users' lives on their health condition. They don't want their illness to be their new normal. They want to be a human being living with relationships, a job, children, where they're relating to the world around them and they're empowered as a human being. If we focus on their health condition, it's actually degrading the emotional reserves that feed our users' willpower. They're going to need that at tough points in their health condition to help stay compliant with their therapy when the going gets rough. A good way to think about our relationship with our users through our device is like an accountant, a CPA. Our users are going to value our tax expertise in April when it's time to file. The rest of the time, they don't want to spend a lot of time of their day talking about their taxes and focusing on how they're going to strategize for next year. Shifting over to consumer product comparisons about connectivity, we're going to be on their person or in their home, And their experience level of our device needs to be raised so that it can survive the comparison to companies like Apple, Samsung, Fitbit, Amazon. Our users learned about connected experiences from companies like these. If our device isn't meeting those expectations and is taking a step backwards, it's going to lead to rejection and dissatisfaction. And in summary, our success in going into the home is going to be greatly influenced by these three factors. Preparing by gathering great design inputs that understand the patient and clinician experience around at-home use. Meeting them where they are with the right mindset and building a relationship with them. And lastly, bringing it home by building the right product experience that meets user expectations and simplifies what we're asking of them. So thank you for your time. And I look forward to hearing from my other fellow speakers.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much. Really excellent. Setting the stage for what do we do when we have a clinical solution or clinical idea? How do we set it up for success in the home? So great to hear about your process. Next coming up, we have Carlos from Luco. Again, a white blood cell counting device for use in the home. Pretty sophisticated stuff. I think if I were to introduce Carlos, I might say, okay, here's a line from his LinkedIn page. Applied image processing algorithm to microscopy and ultrasound data with application in cancer care and meningitis diagnosis. We love the concept of technical teaching, technical learning, but at the same time, Carlos has become a successful CEO of his startup. So that combined with his transition into business is just really a marvelous story. Carlos, please take it away and have some fun.
Thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. And let me share my screen. All right. So as Jeff was saying, I'm here today to share our story in Leuco, where we are developing one example of a device that is meant for home use. And in this particular case, we are focusing on measuring white blood cells non-invasively. Obviously, white blood cells are relevant for many different patient populations, but they are specifically relevant for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy, and that's the first population that we are focusing on. I guess that unfortunately, many of us, we have had personal experience with cancer patients. And here we have a picture actually of a close friend of mine that was diagnosed with a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as we were about to start our project. And actually that personal experience made me realize maybe many of the challenges that these patients face. And I remember that for Miguel, that was the name of my friend, actually being careful about his white blood cell count and being always mindful about potential risk of infection. That was something that was always on his mind. Miguel went successfully through chemotherapy and he is cancer-free today, but obviously he's not alone on these worries. And every year, more than 2 million patients start chemotherapy treatments in Europe and the US, and 350,000 of them end up hospitalized because they acquire an infection while their white blood cells are very low, which as you know, that's a common side effect of chemotherapy, unfortunately. So when that happens, that obviously leads to a huge economic burden in terms of increased hospital readmissions, but also really negative clinical outcomes. And I want to mention that actually this is a situation that has been emphasized under the current COVID pandemic. This population is typically immunocompromised. They are more vulnerable to these infections, and it has become increasingly important to be able to manage this population from home in a remote setting. So this is really where the project started. We really started from the unmet medical need before we develop any technology to solve it. And we actually identified, while we were still fellows, research fellows at MIT, that one of the reasons why this unmet medical need is currently happening is partially because the current technologies to monitor for these white blood cells, they all require blood draws, they are all invasive, so they are confined to the clinic. And there is only so many times that you can bring back the patient to the clinic to test for their white blood cell status, and that is partially creating this unmet clinical need. And just to walk you through the patient's journey, here we have an axis of time as they go through their chemotherapy. And on this axis, you have the evolution of their white blood cell levels. typically they receive their chemo dose on day 1 in the clinic, and after that they go home and they will come back 21 days later, typically for a subsequent round of chemo dose. While they are at home, and as a consequence of the chemotherapy, their white blood cells are going to go down. That's a well-known side effect, but it's uncertain how low they will go. And actually, if they drop below a certain level, that puts them in high risk of one of these life-threatening infections. But because of the limitations that we just mentioned with current testing technologies, doctors and patients are currently in the dark. They don't know how low they are dripping. And under these circumstances, it's very hard for both doctors and patients to actually properly manage the risk of these infections and hospital readmissions. So as a consequence of all of this, that only increases the risk of hospital readmission for these patients and reduces their quality of life. So this is really the med clinical need that we are trying to solve with our home device, which is the first technology that can measure white blood cells without requiring blood samples. So this is really opening up the opportunity for patients to do this from home for the first time and in a supervised way, and much more frequently than was possible with prior technologies. And what this means is that since patients can potentially do daily monitoring, we can identify and flag those patients that are dropping to very low and dangerous levels. And actually clinicians have tools at their disposal when you identify those patients to follow up appropriately with them with different drugs and follow-up visits, and actually minimize the risk of infection and reduce the rate of hospital readmissions, cost and morbidity for these patients. We actually designed our first device taking into account a lot of the human-centered practices that Alex has been talking about. We designed a very simple process where patients are simply instructed to insert their finger in our device, they start the measurement, and in less than 1 minute, they can get a measurement that then gets communicated to the care team and to the patient. And well, I know that Santi, following up to my presentation, the other panelists, will be talking a lot about the data transmission and the service ecosystem for home devices, so stay tuned for that. But I mean, this is something that we are obviously taking into account as we design our device. As everybody all of the rest of the panelists, obviously the objective and the mission for our home device is to improve the quality of care of patients like Miguel and many others like him. And I wanted to take also a minute to talk a little bit about the science that goes behind designing a home device. There are obviously many engineering aspects in being able to drive the adherence of the patients and making it usable by them. But there is always a strong scientific component in making a device work from the home, particularly when we are measuring a new biomarker non-invasively for the first time, as we were doing in our case. This was technology that we all developed, me and the rest of my co-founders developed while we were at MIT. It generated 4 different patents, and it's based on microscopy, as Jeff was introducing. We particularly look at this area on the finger that is called the nail fold. Capillaries are very superficial there, so that gives us an opportunity with our microscopy system to actually collect videos of the capillaries under the skin. This is just a still image. Typically we see a video in our data, but each of these black loops is one of these tiny capillary vessels or blood vessels, and we can see the blood flowing through them. And just because of the wavelength we are using, red cells absorb the light, white blood cells happen to be transparent, so we actually see them as those kind of bright spots flowing through the capillaries as in our data. So then based on this data, our team has developed proprietary AI algorithms that identify those events and combine them so that we can render a measurement. We performed some clinical studies, and we were really excited to get our first in-human proof of concept when we tested a very early prototype. We assembled this while we were still at MIT. We tested it in 42 cancer patients, and we demonstrated that we were able to measure those patients when they dropped to dangerous levels with a high specificity and sensitivity. We also published a couple of peer-reviewed papers on our results. And this was a huge milestone for us in the development of our home device. This was actually the milestone that allowed us to spin out from MIT, leave academia, and actually raise our first round of financing. And I thought that today actually would be really appropriate to talk a little bit about how a home device can also get funded. This is just our story and one example of how this may happen. We divide our development in 3 phases. The first phase, we call it the feasibility phase, and this was largely funded through non-dilutive sources of funding while we were at MIT. So these were like basically covering the different fellowships that we went through and different non-dilutive grants. And that really allowed us to put together the initial founding team and then build that initial prototype that you saw on the previous slide and do that first in human clinical study and actually some customer discovery as well. Those were the milestones that really allow us to raise our seed round of financing, as I was mentioning. So we were able to successfully raise a $2 million seed round of investment that was led by Good Growth Capital, Nina Capital, and Pegasus Tech Ventures. And we are really fortunate to have investors that understand medical device startups and the regulatory process and the kind of hardware-based and science-based companies. But apart from the private sources of funding, our company has been always very focused on complementing that with non-dilutive sources of funding. And after our non-dilutive raising from MIT, we were able to secure a SBIR grant from NIH. This was largely driven by what from the point where I started my presentation, by the unmet medical need. And actually, NIH recognized that this is an important problem for American patients. And we were able to successfully compete for that funding. And that was actually going to allow us to focus on the next milestones for our company that are going to center around industrializing the device and turning that first prototype that you saw into a manufacturable and mass-produced device. And then with that device, conducting the clinical trials that are necessary for FDA approval. In parallel to that, we always keep an eye on the market, and we continue to do pre-marketing activities and interacting with our potential customers so that we are ready for commercialization on phase 3. That's when we plan to raise our Series A. And we have interacted with a few investors, kind of validating that these milestones could be the value inflection points for us to be able to successfully raise that Series A that would be focused on the commercial launch and manufacturing and scaling. Once we get to that phase, I guess that is relevant also to talk a little bit about how a home device gets paid for. And in our company strategy, we are focusing on different customer segments. And for each of those customer segments, we have slightly different value propositions. We are focusing on one side on cancer clinics and hospitals, and we have a value-based pitch to them in the sense that we are preventing those hospital readmissions that have a high dollar value, and we are providing savings to some of these organizations, particularly accountable care organizations. That's still a small part of the US market, but there is a value proposition for them. Most of the US market doesn't work on this value-based proposition, and it works on the system of fee-for-service or reimbursement codes. And on that front, actually, there were really exciting news recently from CMS where they released new reimbursement codes for remote patient monitoring that is really relevant for any home device. So I'm happy to, I don't necessarily have to go into the details here, but I'm happy to comment on this during the Q&A. I guess that with this, I also wanted to end my presentation today acknowledging the rest of my team. Obviously, this is not work that I've done alone, and I have had the support of very committed co-founders. I also wanted to thank our board of directors and our board of advisors that comprises experts in commercialization and regulatory and key opinion leaders in oncology. And that is really complementing the expertise of the team since we are first-time entrepreneurs and somehow new to the medical device world before we actually started this project. So with that, I will finish my presentation. I'm really excited to engage during the Q&A. I'm looking forward to the presentation from the last panelist.
Wonderful, Carlos. Thank you very much. You know, even I can imagine some questions for you. You know, just listening to what you've said, you know, you've got user, you've got electronics, you've got optics, emitter detectors, mechanical, human factors, algorithms, firmware. You know, you packed it all into that tight little box. Looks like a simple gray box, but a lot of stuff going on under the hood. So really nice work.
Thank you.
Very excited to have Shanthi Ramakrishnan here joining us tonight. I won't say how many years, but on her LinkedIn page you can see over 20 years of high-tech communication, wireless, involved in product management, R&D, and culminating in this marvelous part of the industry that she is leading a great company in on how to get that data from boxes like Carlos's to the clinicians that need it. And how many different types of data do they actually have to worry about? Not just the home healthcare data, but other arenas and how it gets into the right form, into the right clinician. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Shanthi Ramakrishnan. Please take it over.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the kind introduction. And give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. Everyone, good evening. I know it's about dinner time, and hopefully you're at least having drinks prior to dinner, and I won't keep you very long between you and the dinner and the drinks. Jeff, once again, thank you very much. I want to do two things, right? Before I begin the presentation and share some of the key messages, particularly what Jeff was talking about and Alex and Carlos in terms of data, I want to reiterate the context in which we are having this event, which is COVID-19. But I want to refresh most of the people's mind. It's not just one crisis that we are under. Right now, we are having multiple crises. One of them is COVID-19. We also have economic crisis. We have social unrest that is going on in some parts of the country, or certainly in the US, in some parts of the world, I would say. And of course, there is this political uncertainty as well, right? So there are multiple crises that we are dealing with. Some of them are intractable. However, one of the positive message and the trend that we are seeing based on tremendous amount of analysis of the data that we constantly analyze, the crisis also opens up opportunities. So I do want to give the audience a peek into what type of opportunities are available, certainly with what Alex described in terms of shifting the healthcare and aging in place in patients' home, and how do we have the right set of products for the patients, and beyond that, what else is going on, right? So that is the context, and the vantage point in which I'm going to present my message is going to be largely observations, hands-on experiences serving patients and the clinicians with a generous dose of regurgitated insights. I'm going to be very honest and say I don't have fresh insights. So some of what you're going to hear from me is you might have been there and done that, right? But there are certain, hopefully some surprises, some lessons that we have learned and I have learned that you have not seen before, and it helps all of us to prepare and to prepare for the future, and what are we going to do in terms of exploiting the opportunities that are presenting, and we are definitely seeing it, particularly during the last 6 months of COVID. With that one, the first, before I go through this presentation, there are two things that I would like for the audience to take away from certainly my presentation, and those two are two things. Number one, people. Number two, simplicity. Both of them are very, very complex, right? We're all complex, and so is simplicity. And sometimes both can be very difficult. People can be difficult, and so is the simplicity. But I want you to think about the simplicity and people, because ultimately every single one of us who is gathered in this event, regardless of whichever company that we work for or whichever product that we are working for, we need to have that one almost in our DNA to say, okay, we are serving people, we are going to reduce the complexity of someone's life. You are already burdened by disease, and Alex talked about it, and Carlos gave a very beautiful example of his friend who is going through this problem. So I want you to think about it constantly. Simplicity and people, right? With that one, scale matters, right? This is slightly a self-promotion of our company. However, this is a tree, very simple representation of a tree. It is a live tree. It is growing, particularly in the last 6 months during COVID situation. It is just growing by leaps and bounds. But I don't want you to spend too much time on the lot of numbers on the tree branches, but few things, right? One of the things that I want to convey to you is the fact that some of the data that we are looking at, 500,000 patients, install base of devices that we have, and 15 million connections that happen, and the data that Jeff talks about, and Carlos talked about, and Alex talked about, scale actually matters. And why does scale matter? They matter for 3 reasons. First of all, when you have a large install base like any company has or any institution has, it gives a very, very credible mechanism for us to conduct very strong, statistically valid and statistically significant analysis. And as part of that analysis, it almost pauses you, or it challenges you to think about the assumptions and hypotheses that we are building in order to even do an analysis. That is one of the lessons that we continue to learn as part of eDevice, and certainly someone who leads a company like eDevice, right? What are the assumptions that I'm making? Can some of these data actually challenge my assumptions and hypotheses that I have? The second thing is, as we go through the analysis, one of the things that we found is it's not just the trends that we see, there are pockets of trends, right? For example, there are blocks of trends that happen. Some of them repeat, some of them are discontinuous, some of them are, I would say, disjointed, some of them are anomaly, but there are blocks of patterns that help to do 2 things. First of all, it helps all of us who are serving customers, particularly the patients, the clinicians, and other parts of the healthcare industry, to come together to say, how do we really understand and probe the problem that we are trying to solve? And how do we, in a very, very predictive, high confidence level, how do we predict what are some of the things that could happen to a patient, particularly when they're dealing with some disease states? And how can we enable the clinicians to prevent that decompensation in some cases, or in terms of the prediction of something that could be going wrong? So that's how the scale matters. This is, we have, it is not just the data that we look at where is the data coming from, where are the sources of data, and as other speakers, panelists talked about, the data comes from many different places. It comes in different formats. Some of them are raw, some of them are, I would say, well-structured, unstructured, but we have to look at data to say, okay, what is the nugget that we are going to deliver for both the physicians and the clinicians? And one of the expertise that we have built as a company is to invest more and more in terms of what are we going to do and unearthing the nuggets by literally building up a system that is able to collect data regardless of the devices, regardless of where it comes from. And this is the purpose of why the scale actually matters. In a different, I would say slightly different angle, how did we do it, right? So we know why the scaling matters, and this slide is going to talk about how do we do it. In the center of the center panel is a device. As Alex said, clinicians, I completely agree with Alex. I don't think anybody, it's not just the clinicians, patients, or even a consumer like myself, I don't need yet another device, right? However, what we did as a company is to have the center panel, which is the patient device, incredibly simple. And what that means is that we hid the complexity of a device really, really fully well. So what that means is that the patients really don't do anything at all. The box, as soon as they are taken out of a kit that we prepare, works with the devices that are on the left panel, whether it is a class 3 device, class 2 device, or even a class 1 devices. So we cover the entire spectrum, manufacturer agnostic, and this device, and Alex used a beautiful word, it passively collects the data, it aggregates the data, and it immediately processes the data and presents the meaningful, really meaningful insight to the clinician, which is on the right panel, which is called the Health Go Live, which is a portal. That's where most of the data ends up with. The reason why we invested in all 3, particularly in the two panels, right? The middle panel and the right panel is, we know that we need partnership. eDevice, and it's not just the eDevice as a company. We know that we have to work together and you need to collaborate with each other. And this is a model in which we can say, look, this is an open platform. We invite anybody, we play with you, and we are going to work together in terms of delivering value to both the clinicians as well as the patients who are using the devices. So I'm going to shift, I'm going to let this one, okay. It was not 30 seconds. In case you noticed, it was intentionally, I reduced it about, I think, 3 seconds. I'm going to give you one valuable lessons that we have learned, right? And I certainly have learned in the last 20 years of serving this marketplace. For those of you who appreciate, let's say, a very expensive, precious gem called diamond, diamond is typically characterized by 4 C's. It's called cut, the color, the clarity, and carat, which is the size. And then I would say very similar to the 4 C's, we also notice that there are 4 C's. One is to capture the attention of the patients. Second is to convince a patient. And the third one is for them to consider, just consider using a device, yet another device, right? Yet another gadget, yet another product in their home, and they have so many of them. Those 3 C's are absolutely critical, and the decision happens from a patient perspective, in some cases even the clinician's perspective, in less than 30 seconds. It doesn't take our customers more than 30 seconds to at least quickly evaluate the 3 C's. And I'm intentionally not mentioning the 4th C because it's going to come either in the format of a quiz, or I might actually give the answer away. But so the 3 C's are capture, convince, and have them consider using a device, all less than 30 seconds. That's it, no more than 30 seconds. Another lessons that we learned is, and our other panelists also talked about it, we have heard from clinicians ad nauseum. I have, and I'm sure each of you have, ad nauseum for the last 20 years. They don't need more data. They don't want more data. They want nuggets. They want us to sift the data and give them just the nuggets, right? Whether it is a gold nugget or even in some cases diamond that they can cut and polish. That's what we do. That's what we should be doing. We should not be dumping more data because they are just not helping them at all. As Alex was saying, it is really adding more burden to the clinicians, and so they are dealing with the inefficiency of delivery of care that they are trying to deal with. So what we do is to make sure that we distill the data, we draw insights, and we synthesize them and clearly give them very, very list of prioritized actions that the clinicians have to take. We do, for some clinicians, particularly that are conducting a lot of research, and particularly the research, I would say we also grant them complete access to take a deep dive of data, right? Either at a patient level, cohorts of patients, and in some cases, population health level, and also the longitudinal analysis, should they want to consider it. So they have an opportunity to do that. So what we are doing is that we are sifting the data for them, and we are distilling literally what they really, really need to know for them to provide the most valuable healthcare to the customers, as well as giving them the opportunity to, should they want to do it, we are giving them the opportunity to do the data analysis. And the third part of it, which I'm not intentionally mentioning on this slide, is the fact that we work very closely with a lot of specialist physicians and clinicians who work with us in terms of developing algorithms, right? And some of these analysis and some of these synthesis, I'm a huge fan of relevant technology. Many of them we have found is that you don't need an AI engine. You don't need a machine language engine, or you don't need, let's say, natural NLP, natural language processing. There is a place for it. I'm all for it. At the same time, there are some disease states and pathologies, but you really don't need all of them. We have enough of other tools that are already ready where we can really give the clinicians to quickly conduct and get to the essence of how they can manage the disease on behalf of the patients. This is an invaluable lesson that we have learned. As I said, I'm hoping you all know about this. It's just that it is time that we pay attention, particularly during COVID, where we know that the claims data shows that from April to July of this year, the number of commercial claims for telehealth went from 500,000 patients exactly last year ago to 29 million claims, 29 million. So we don't want to burden the clinicians anymore at all with more and more data. So we need to pay attention to it. Jeff mentioned it many times, and so did Carlos about data. This is a very, I would say, busy slide. If there is one takeaway that I would like for you to consider is the one that is in the center. Protect and preserve the integrity of the data as if it is your life. That's what we do. That's what we have to do. Secure it, make it seamless, make it passive collection of it, make it real time, make it absolutely fail safe. That is what we are all here about, right? Follow the data, whether it is coming from the front end, back end, ether, cloud, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it comes from, where it originates, where it is going. Preserve it as if your life depends on it. That's what we do, and I would encourage everyone to do the same. So I'm going to stop here and shift the gear a little bit. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, none of the things that I've shared with you is anything unique, right? I'm sure you have heard this one ad nauseum many, many times. So what exactly is the potential that is still left, that it is still untapped, particularly during the COVID situation and even before that and after that? What is the untapped potential? You know what it is? I'm going to give the answer away. I mentioned there was a 4C and I did not mention the 4th C. You know what the 4th C is? Consistency of usage of any device, any gadget, anything at all with the patients. It is the number and the statistics in terms of consistency of use. It is sobering. It is less than 30%. If you look at this slide, even though this is dated about 2016, I know the data on the 2019, the adoption of technology or dissipation of technologies near saturation. If you look at the smartphones or the tablets or cellular phone or other technology that are on this slide, it is near saturation. It's almost 97, 98%. It's not that. Even though we all have the gadgets, we have found less than 30% of the patients some of whose life depends on very active engagement. They don't even use them. So the patient engagement is the most challenging, untapped potential that we need to be focusing on. And that is the opportunity. COVID, as I said, is one of the crises, but it has unleashed this potential by leaps and bounds just in the last 3 to 4 months. And if you look at some of the data, whether it is economic data or industrial and investment banking data, financial data, if there is one industry that is really continuing to grow, right, the growth is going to come from connected care. And that's why this forum and this event is absolutely, absolutely critical. As I said, we are one company. We need to work together, and that's where I'm looking for collaboration with all of you and to figure out how do we tap the potential that it is still untapped, and how do we move the needle from 30% of the patients who are really engaged to at least 60%, right? That should be the obligation that we need to provide both the patients as well as the clinicians. And then the last slide, I don't want to you to forget about this. This is the simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I don't really know who to attribute this quote to. I have heard, actually it was Leonardo da Vinci, who actually made this one, said this a long time ago, paraphrased. And we do know that one of the things that Alex talked about is the fact that this was on, I believe in 1977, Apple, when they first introduced their product, they had this one, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. One thing that I would leave with you as a question, something to ponder and something to think about, how do we solve the problem together, is the fact that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. We all agree with it, but it's also not very easy, right? It is complex, it is difficult, but I do think that if we collectively work together, there is this untapped potential that I just talked about. It is something that we can really, really tap into. So with that one, I am going to yield the floor back to Jeff. And thank you for the opportunity.
All right, I'll take the floor back. Thank you, Shanti. That is absolutely terrific. You know, when Shanti, when you and I first started our conversation a number of weeks ago, months ago, you know, one of the things that struck me was you really are trying to get all the people participating that the clinicians want to participate. You want them all to use the devices, but actually not even half end up participating, even though they're asked to and they've got the access. And so when you start talking about where can we go from here, we start going back to Alex. We go back to Alex, how are you going to make me use your device? How am I going to want to? Does it have to look like an iPhone? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. So very exciting stuff. Look, we're opening up the floor now to question and answers. We've had a couple of questions come in. Actually, the first question is for Carlos. Can we get everybody's video on for this period of time, perhaps? Does this make sense? Great, super. All right, Carlos. So that was a very nice, lovely box that you had there. But as I understand it, that was the box you went to clinicals with, you went to market with. Are you going through commercialization? Will the box be different? Can you share a little bit about where you are in the FDA approval process? And then what do you need to accomplish in your next round of product development?
All right. I guess that there were a lot of questions in there. I'll try to go one by one. The first question was about the box and whether that's the final design that we are going to market with. Many actually of the images that we saw in our presentation in terms of the product concept, that's what they are. They are just the concept. And I guess that on one side, at our stage of development, we still have the product concept on one side. And then we have our prototype, functional prototype on the other side. The functional prototype is kind of the more clunky version that you saw on one of our slides. And that's the one that we've tested on clinical pilots so far. Currently, we are working on that process of getting a production ready unit. So we are kind of marrying both and making a functional device that looks like the ultimate product. And that's what we are actually going to take to the pivotal studies and, well, first usability studies to validate the form factor, ergonomics, and human considerations. After that, to the pivotal studies for the FDA. So that's. I hope that answers the first question. The second question was where we were on the regulatory process. So we've been interacting with the FDA. We did a request for classification. They consider our device to be a de novo, and there was no predicate that was kind of doing what our device is doing before. So we are following a class 2 de novo pathway. We are currently at the pre-submission stage, and actually we have a pre-submission meeting with the FDA tomorrow. So this is tomorrow.
What are you doing here, man? Why are you here?
Well, we've been preparing to that meeting with anticipation. So I think we are well prepared for it. But tomorrow is an exciting day for us. And we put together basically the clinical protocol that we are planning to conduct in terms of number of patients, endpoints, performance and diagnostic performance. And we are discussing with them whether they think that protocol is and those diagnostic targets are appropriate for approval. And once they give us the green light on that, then we can proceed and actually execute on that trial. Obviously, we want to make sure that they will agree with it before we actually execute it. So I hope that answers the second question. The third question I forgot already. I think there was a third one.
No, that was great. I think
right.
The takeaway is feasibility is done. You know you're getting the results that you need to get through clinicals, and now to go through the de novo process, which is a challenging process. We congratulate you on where you are in that process. But yeah, no, it's a long process to get this kind of a technology into the home. I think that's really kind of the message here.
Yes.
From that perspective. Question for Alex. You had on your deck at one point what areas are there big, there are areas where there are big market opportunities for home health care. And I was wondering what you would comment on what is beyond the classical telehealth concept of blood pressure, temperature, weight, and that sort of stuff.
There's a ton out there. I've personally have worked on drug delivery at home, in the home, on the person. Bringing data-driven health improvement tools into users' hands and empowering them to make great decisions that help to drive their wellness forward. It is a hugely untapped market, and there's a lot of room for new applications. And there's a lot that we're seeing out there that obviously I can't talk about, but bringing them into the discussion as more than just a participant in their own health is a major milestone moving forward for helping our patients to be more successful in their healthcare. And I know that's been a goal for many clinicians. I know that there are many patient advocates who are driving that same vein. And that's one of the things that I love about, opportunities like speaking here at MDG with my two esteemed colleagues here. It's great to share these very user-focused stories, because it connects us with the clinician advocacy groups, it connects us with the patient advocacy groups, and all of them are very, very much on board for how we can help users to become more at the center of their own healthcare. And this connected, moving into the home space, it's been going on for decades. We find that people recover better in their own environment, with their own relationships, with their ties back to the community. And the powerful story that Carlos is sharing here with managing the cycles of chemotherapy and how you manage your health in between it, it's a obvious opportunity for bringing diagnostics into the home. And it's such a powerful story that he was able to show. And the powerful stories that Shanti's sharing about how bringing that connectivity brings the cycle of better insights to the clinicians about how their patients are behaving. These are all untapped areas where I'm sure each of them could find so much depth in parallel applications out there. It's broad and limitless what we could be doing with this.
Excellent, excellent. We've got a question from Jacob here. I guess it's for the panel. With telehealth usage seeing such a significant growth, but it appears that the usage is varying, in some areas and regions dropping. And then, of course, there is the diversity of what the different regions need. How does the panel see home health and remote monitoring evolving? Is it a fad? Is it relegated to specific disease states? And then I'll add the other question after that. So who would like to take on, where are we going with home healthcare usage? Telehealth, I guess.
I can take a stab at it. I think it's a great question, right? If you just look at the data from April through June, July, the spike is very, very high. And then certainly in April and May, it was incredibly high, and it started lowering for certain areas, right? The growth that we experienced during those 3-4 months, I would say they were concentrated. I think the question was fantastic, concentrated on 3 areas. One is the primary care physicians, providing basic, I call them teleconsultation. And then there is a cluster of activity, and these are based on purely claims data. The cluster of, let's say, claims that were all towards psychological counseling, general counseling, psychiatric counseling. That is a huge bucket that happened during the COVID. And then the third area was pediatric visits. And then the fourth, unusually so, was cardiology, even though I'm not fully understand why cardiology, even though there are some data that can support it. So the question was, do we see a trend? And then the trend in terms of the Northeast versus Southwest and the East and the West, yes, there is a huge variation in terms of both the adoption rate as well as the decline that we are seeing, that we saw in July. But we are seeing some early signs, even though the August data is not out. If you look at purely from the claims data, with whether you call it as a resurgence of COVID or it's still in the first wave of COVID, we are seeing an increased usage of it, right? Particularly, as I mentioned, it is not just the health crisis that we are dealing with. We are also having disrupted work life. We are having disrupted school structure and stuff. And so the telehealth adoption is beginning to rise. I'm just going to hold off until I see the data from the August and hopefully the September and the fall to see what will happen. But there are some patterns, right? And if you look at some of the projections from not the claims data per se, but from economists and from investment banking reports and financial reports, I think it was Alex who said it, telehealth has been we have been doing telehealth for the last, 25 years. It is not new. It is definitely not new. And I think what has happened in the last year and a half, and Carlos had it on his presentation, there were at least 5 different new codes for remote patient monitoring. We have seen an explosion of opportunities because of that, because there is a good economic incentive to do the remote patient monitoring. That helps as a trigger for seeing the new opportunity that Alex talks about and Carlos talks about. So that's my, I would say, somewhat of an opinion.
Nice, thank you. You know, it's interesting. It almost seems like a circle here. The better the environment is understood, the better whatever disease state, the better the device, the better the interface that makes somebody want to use it, the better the data is translated to the clinicians in a way that doesn't suck away more time as opposed to provide the actual analysis that they're looking for, the more we'll have a continued increasing adoption in telehealth. And so it's kind of a conundrum. Maybe COVID was the jumpstart of this trend. And so then I would ask Carlos, do you see the reimbursement codes? This is a follow-on question from Jake. Do you see the reimbursement codes remaining stable, or do you see them changing moving forward to either increase more access to telehealth or purposely decrease access to telehealth?
Yeah, I think that the trend, I mean, in the last few years, particularly in that last year and a half, it's been like for an increase on these reimbursement codes for telehealth. Now during the particular like acute crisis that we are experiencing, there have been many procedures that typically were being reimbursed only if they were performed in the clinic, and that those restrictions have been lifted, and they have been increasingly allowing more and more procedures to actually happen remotely just because of the circumstance. But I think that those changes are here to stay, and I think that even once we get to the new normal, I think that those procedures will continue to happen remotely to a certain degree, and those codes and reimbursement codes will also be allowed for remote monitoring. So I think that those trends are here to stay, and I cannot see them decreasing necessarily. I think that actually we're going to see more and more of them.
Nice. Sounds like the seeds have been planted, and we all know life finds a way, and those trends will continue, it seems. So that's great. Team, this is from Stanley. What are the patient's safety and privacy consideration with home healthcare devices? You know, we know about devices that go into a surgical suite, have their own safety requirements. What types of safety and privacy considerations do you guys take into account when you're dealing with an in-home situation?
A bunch of them. I can take point on this to start off with. If either one of you would like to grab on, certainly insert, because there's a lot here. I run human factors for Sunrise Labs. This is an area where I spend quite a bit of time. We do have to prove safe and effective use during the submission process to get FDA approval or international approval for any medical device that we're putting into the home. It's obviously scaled to fit the risk profile of the device. There's very different approaches depending on what we could be doing. A dose reminder is very different than something that is calculating a dose of a drug device, a drug delivery device. Diagnostics, there's a whole set of criteria under there that you need to prove in terms of that you're getting the right information, you're getting the right sample, that you're going ahead and you're proving out that there's no potential errors in the type of conclusion that you're reaching. I mean, Carlos's work here is obviously spotless, because being able to present that clear answer right at point of care, there's some big technical hurdles that he had to overcome there, and it's a great product for having reached that point. Safe and effective use is at the core of anything that we do in the home. And as we discussed in each of our presentations, it's just, there's not as much support there. So in some ways, the hurdle is a little higher than what you would normally expect in a hospital. You have protocols, you have safe environments that you're operating within, and you can claim that in your risk management profile of your device in a lot of ways. And when you're in the home, the FDA is going to ask you some really tough questions. I can tell you from experience that they will expect that you have raised your game to face that burden.
Nice, thank you. This one is for Shanthi. Years ago, from Paul, Continua Alliance was attempting to create standardization with home health devices. How would you comment on the progress toward that standardization with your work?
Yeah, great question. I do know Continua really well, and I thought it was an excellent participation from the industry, right? So including Intel and other technology companies coming together to establish standards. In some respects, I would say some of the standardization standardization is very difficult. Let's be very honest about it. We all would like to have one standard, a panacea, and that doesn't exist. That's the reality of the situation. So the work of Continua is very, very important, right? For example, they have established a nuanced way of, I'm just picking one example of Bluetooth interface and Bluetooth exchange of information and standards that the participants of the Continua obviously advocate for. But we do need more. I don't know if we need more groups. We need to figure out how to handle the standardization much better. Alex talked about the fact that we are taking some of these devices into the home. If it is a class 3 device, class 2 device, they have an inbuilt mechanisms in place, right? Where the parameters, the blocks in which we are going to play, particularly when it comes to safety and efficacy and security and stuff. And then we see a lot of companies with, let's say, a device or a software, and it's very easy to register your device. I mean, you can just go ahead and you self-claim. That needs to change a little bit, and I think we need to figure out how to involve the right set of regulatory agencies all over the world, and figuring out how the technology companies, including the medtech participants, can really address the standardization problems. Because at this point, I would say, great work by Continua. I love what they have done. We need more. We need broader impact in terms of standardizing. I mean, if you look at EMR connectivity, people will, if you talk to some of the clinicians or practices which have to go ahead and implement an EMR, the feedback is not that favorable, even though you can claim and say EMR has very, very good standards to follow. So there is way to go.
Nice. Thank you. I have a question for you, Shanthi. And it goes to standardization. So you have different devices, I mean, from cardiac to the regular blood pressure, telehealth stuff. And then you're aggregating them into these dashboards. Seems to me that there's a link between what your client, the clinician, needs and the data you're actually able to collect. Who develops the algorithm or the data aggregation and parsing methodology?
Great question. Certainly from an e-device perspective, we work very, very closely with the clinicians, right? Particularly if they happen to be specialists, whether it's in the cardiology or nephrology or anyone, we work very closely to figure out how to develop algorithms. It's not just algorithm development, including actually running an analysis of the data. And as I said, I was not flippant, and I don't want to be disrespectful of the AI and the experts, the machine language experts and others. So it is in collaboration, very, very close collaboration with the clinicians, in which we can, I mean, we are not clinical experts, so we do work very closely with them to see what is the data that they are looking for. More importantly, what is the problem that they're trying to solve, right? And can that be solved in terms of developing automated, and Alex talked about it in a different context in terms of automatically gathering data, and you're taking it one step further to say, okay, we have automatically aggregated data. Can we feed it through an engine, a small engine, which is going to be pathology or a chronic state condition, which is going to really yield the insights that the clinicians want. But without the clinicians and the experts, the researchers, we cannot develop that in silos or in closed doors. That doesn't work. I would love to hear both Carlos and Alex's experience on that one.
Please, when you guys go ahead, Carlos. Let's hear what your thinking is.
Well, I mean, I agree with Santi. I mean, in our case, we also work very closely with the clinicians to actually design what data they want to see and what data they consider is actionable. I mean, I agree. I think Alex made the point, and Santi as well, that physicians already have a very tight schedule, and they don't want to have more data than what they currently have or what they absolutely need to provide better care for their patients. So we work very closely with our clinicians. We obviously take into account also the voice of the customers. I think that there are obviously two ends of the data communication. They are not necessarily always symmetric. So sometimes the data that you present to the patient is very different from the data that you present to the clinicians for many different reasons, including regulatory considerations. So, well, I mean, you have to work with the users, the clinicians on one side and the patients on the other side. And I mean, that's what we've been doing, and that's our experience so far.
Right.
And just as a final minor note to the really great points raised by both Shanti and Carlos, you put me in a room where we're talking about what a user's going to want to see. I'm going to be really a strong advocate for what the user needs to be successful, and trying to take the technology that we can do and craft it to support what they're doing. Healthcare is greatly empowered by technology, but it really is human connections and human capabilities. And anything that we're doing is really a force enhancer on top of that. Our job is to augment the human capabilities that a clinician or a patient can do for themselves. And anything that we do needs to be in service of that if we're going to be successful. We're never going to bolt something to somebody and say, this is the way that it will be. They have to be directly engaged. The healthcare model, one of the great things about these changes is the fact that we are engaging patients. We are enabling them to be great advocates for themselves, and we are enabling clinicians to help guide great advances in the way that healthcare is delivered. And the right data to do that is really a learning process by engaging with them early and getting those inputs. That was what I was trying to tee up. And both of my fellow speakers have great, powerful stories about what is done when you do that right. And it's so exciting to see where they're taking, what they've done successfully in that space and how it's going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Question from Stephen for the panel. How do you see the future of the medical home use products? Comparison with Apple, Samsung is great, but those development life cycles are much quicker compared to the development life cycle of a medical product. So how do you see the next few years shaping up for, I guess, for more products, and how long does it take to do a home health product?
I might jump in on this first, and then I certainly would welcome both of your perspectives on, you're operating and shipping. So, we certainly facilitate that, but you're in the firing line here a little bit. I did, solicit this question with some of my comments. Honestly, I don't have a crystal ball, but a huge part of this is going to be a shortening of the life cycle. Life cycle management, increasing cadences, it's on the horizon. You see very big companies from the tech world getting involved in healthcare. Verily, that's going to be a pressure and a competitor for many people in the future. And they operate at scale, they deliver at speed, and they are looking for ways to leverage their capabilities in this space. And, in the near term, benchmark, rob, cheat, and steal to learn from these consumer products and get out there and make your own play in that space to say, when you connect, how easy is it? The system integration that Apple was doing 5 years ago was brilliant. They've still continued that pace to today. It's been the core of their success about how it just works. And when clients talk about the desire to be the Apple of their industry, that really is a system engineering commitment to just working. And the investment of time and effort into the architectures and everything else that make that simplicity, it's so complicated on the backside, and they're hiding all of that. And the way that they're able to make that work is the challenge that we as a medical device industry have to rise to, because it does interfere with the ability of our users, both on the clinical side and at the home side, to be successful in the delivery of their own care. And, I foresee, my guess on the world without my crystal ball, is that the competitors who are going to enter the space from the tech arena, who are looking to disrupt healthcare, are going to put competitive pressures to find the natural balance between delivery of a safe product, which is what traditional medical has always advocated for, and never compromising there, but also starting to find ways to be more successful at the cadence. And that's my prediction. So
aggressive program management, accurate design inputs, don't be redoing stuff, and learn from what's already just happened.
And low feature iteration on minor releases. Not everything requires a full clinical validation. If you're correcting what is a potentially poor healthcare experience for login, there's such an opportunity there. I mean, that's a table stake. That's so low entry. And how you help users to manage their data, how you manage their device, those things aren't core to a clinical trial, which drives long cadences. Mm-hmm. So if we're keeping that the same, what's our regulatory strategy? That's not my area of expertise. That helps us to start to carve out safe iterative zones to be successful at faster releases, to improve the experience around a core set of features that are really what is validated in the really super long lead times of a clinical trial. And the rest is, how are you nimble in human factors with these updates to deliver and prove that you're safe and effective? What's your regulatory strategy that allows you to do these iterative releases and have a roadmap plan that is solid?
Great. Now this one, this is from Donnie, and I'm really wondering this one. Are you seeing home monitoring data or home device data ending up in patient charts? And if so, how is the issue of solving duplicate patient IDs being managed? Like, is this data, like Carlos, is your data ending up in a doctor's chart? Will it?
Well, it does, as I was saying, like, then, I mean, the data from our device gets transmitted to the physicians, I mean, all the data is anonymized per HIPAA compliance, and then obviously then, I mean, all the personal identifiers of the patient get translated to a unique ID. That ID obviously is different from other patients' IDs, and I mean, the system that generates them kind of properly addresses that. So, I mean, we've never, in our experience, we've never encountered a problem with having duplicate IDs, just because the ID generator kind of makes sure that there are no other IDs when the data is anonymized. So those IDs are unique. But I mean, I'll be happy to hear the thoughts from Santi or Alex on this.
I would say the same thing. I have not seen any duplicates at all. So it is a unique identifier and de-identified data. And that's why I said preserving the integrity of the data, right? Including the patient ID or any other information is absolutely critical for our business. So we protect it with our lives. So I have not experienced this one. And that's why I was trying to figure out, okay, when could it occur? And what are the safety mechanisms that we put in place when we are building out a system, right, to ensure that there are not duplicates. And if there are, how do we immediately identify them and correct them as soon as possible? But I have not seen it. So we must have a pretty solid system in place.
Excellent, excellent. Now it is 7:31. I think we'll take one more question. This one is from Arlen. How would you define the difference between sick care or health care, and does that affect the product development strategy at all?
It's a good question. I mean, for me, my first thought is that the difference between sick care and healthcare, that's the question, right?
Yes.
Did I hear that right? I think that sick care obviously addresses a reactive care model where patients get sick, and then once they have to get sick, you deal with their condition. Whereas healthcare, and I guess that's also what the model is shifting towards, in my mind, is more reactive, right? You are trying to prevent patients from getting sick to start with. So I think that more and more healthcare solutions, and particularly tech healthcare solutions and home monitoring health solutions, focus on, again, monitoring those patients and kind of giving early alerts before people get sick, so that they don't even have to be in that situation. So to me, that would be the distinction.
Very good.
I agree with your definitions, Carlos. And, you know, my guess is that there's, you know, I see untapped potential in both. There's certainly emergent interventions that, you know, are being designed right now in the healthcare space. And there's, you know, sort of some floundering in the wellness space in some areas, but I see convergence between the two coming together around a patient-centric vision of how health is managed. The US market is in some ways unique in its focus on technology as a, you know, sort of a panacea of how we can deliver healthcare effectively and where great solutions are going to happen. We have a very deep faith in technology in our country. As diagnostics get better, as we shift into the home, preventative care is obviously a driving factor in reimbursement strategies and how we're preventing the problem in the first place. Because once it becomes a problem, once it escalates into chronic care, once it becomes something where there are major interventions that need to be driving people into the hospital, you know, reimbursements, you know, from payers are obviously trying to apply strategic pressure to drive device developers into certain areas of intervention in the healthcare space and population management. And all this is part of the big picture, and where data is obviously valuable. As the data picture matures, and as we get better at interpreting data and drawing the synthesis, some of the great points that Shanti was pulling together, you know, Carlos on his focus about talking about presenting great data for, you know, a very specific use case. Those type of early plays into the space that are going to lead the way for the rest of us to follow, and that's going to be some of the grease for the skids that drive us into a position to be able to have patients being able to adjust their own behaviors to be more successful at managing their health, to empower them to understand the relationships that are going on in a non-lecture-y kind of way. No one needs a nanny, but what they do need is ways that are going to help them to be more successful in managing their health. And that picture's still pretty broad and unfocused, but you're seeing two great speakers here today who have a focus in that space that's going to help be the leading edge of this, in my mind.
I
Nice.
agree with Alex, and that's why I said, despite the simplicity of solutions that we all bring up, right? Whether it is a drug or device, or, well, drug may not be that simple, but device or anything, the patient engagement is still very, very low. We do know, for example, Fitbits and other health and wellness devices, the statistics is probably about 1 in 5 have one. Many of them do not even use it, particularly during COVID situations. We have seen during clinical studies where the patients they don't use them. And so we need to, instead of preaching, we need to figure out how to enable the patients to get out of the sickness mode into more of managing their health so they don't get sick in the first place. And technology can just be an enabler.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think that's a great point. I want to tack on one last small thought. It's this reactive mentality, even in some of the commercial space. The people doing the wellness technologies, Fitbit, other technology platforms, they are great products. Right now, some of the infrastructure that's necessary to drive us away from being more reactive. So how many steps did you take is still a reactive coaching methodology. What food did you eat is still a reactive coaching methodology. It's the best that we have right now. But as we start to develop more, better sensors, there's some entirely speculative things. So when somebody makes poor food choices, part of that could be things like stress management. That's a coping mechanism. If we understand that better and we start to see the patterns develop, and this is when we say data is kind of key to this, and modeling human behavior and understanding the deep-rooted behavioral psychology of what's going on with our end users, going in and saying, you're going to choose this food, actually choose this food, like, it's too late. You've already made the decision. You're trying to compensate for something that is an awful day. Okay, I'm going to have a talk tonight. Am I polished? Am I ready? Okay, well, maybe I'll make a poor food choice at lunch to kind of compensate, or drink too much coffee in the afternoon. There's things that maybe the better play eventually is to kind of dump my behavior out into, hey, Alex, have you meditated today? Take 10 minutes, refocus your mind. Those kind of interventions are asymmetric to the problem and really will be more effective if we can find the right way to intervene. I mean, that's a hypothetical. There's a lot of holes you can poke in it, but that asymmetrical approach to redirecting user behavior is really going to be the key to the intervention of wellness once the market matures. And that's no slight on any of these great consumer product companies that are doing amazing work. I want to make sure that, because this is recorded, that they understand that that is really well done product for what's available to us right now. It's the nascency of this entire set of technology where we could be going.
Oh, this is great. This is great. You get the feeling that, I hate to use this phrase, that we're really just at the tip of the iceberg. There's population acceptance, patient acceptance, clinician acceptance. So there's a lot of accepting that has yet to be done. But very encouraging that there are now some reimbursement codes around this from which to build a whole new way of dealing with patients. So this is very, very exciting. It's almost like the colonial times. We're just getting in and getting going, though we've been talking about this for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'd like to very much thank our three wonderful panelists for really wonderful, intelligent sharing of your stories sharing of your technologies and the work that you've gone to start to become some of the building blocks of home healthcare. So for one moment before we split, I'd like to once again remind our attendees to look for the recording link that will come, that you'll be able to review what just happened tonight if you'd like. We're all available for reaching out on LinkedIn. If anybody in the audience can't find somebody, just reach out to me or to somebody at MDG, and we'll make sure that you get in contact. And then lastly, keep in mind the MDGX stories, the talks that are coming a week from tonight. And then think, what story could I tell? We'll be actively engaging our community to bring more people's stories to the community through what you have to say. So please reach out to us. I'll be driving that effort to build this part of our programming. And then lastly, the third Wednesday of this month, you want to talk about what happens when you throw hundreds of billions of dollars at something because you want to have a vaccine pretty quickly. Well, you're going to get to see where some of that money's gone. So come on back in 2 weeks also. These next 2 weeks are complimentary, and we look forward to seeing you. Other than that, please, Shanti.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this great opportunity to present our stories and perspectives. It was a fantastic event. As Jeff was saying, if there are any questions that are still unanswered, please reach out to us. And once again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and definitely to Alex and Carlos, and a huge shout out to the MDG team and the Sunrise team. I know there was a lot of behind the scenes work that was done, so I sincerely appreciate how much of effort that went into put out a program like this. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks so much. You guys are awesome. Bill Dennison, we turn it over to you for closing out the night. Thank you very much. Enjoy your dinners.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.